Hi, loving friends. It's such a pleasure and a blessing to be with you here today in this expanded moment of now. Here I am at Kettle Pond up in Tweedsworth National Park on New Hawk Nation's land. So in today's video, we will be looking at discussing shame as part of the growing process, and it is important to come to peace with the presence and the necessity of adult shame, to come to peace with the presence of your adult years, and to own the degree of impact adult shame now can have like ever before. To adequately end your shame, certain things must be accomplished, divine ones. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Firstly, it is important to come to peace with the fact that your reality had to include shame, okay, as part of the growing process. Secondly, you come to peace with the presence, not the content of, but the presence of adult shame in you. Thirdly, you fully understand the devastating impact of what went wrong with shame in these adult years with its deep pain. Fourthly, and finally, you learn the specific techniques geared precisely with this kind of shame to end the shame completely and conclusively. And it is to that end that we explore together the final wave of adult shame with its deep pain. Alright, so the first thing we say, and which is important, is the fact that your reality had to include shame as part of the growing process, right? This is because for many the question arises, if it hasn't already, it will. If I create my own reality, why on earth would I have been so stupid, so naive, so shallow, so wrong, and so horrible to have done something like shame? Why would I have done that? And why would humanity be so short-sighted as to create such idiocy of shame? With that, of course, comes the shame of shame itself. And it is important to understand that the function of shame is intended, right, to be a positive thing, to have a positive ramifications. As hurtful, dreadful, painful, nightmarish, right, or even horrific it has been, it was intended to initially at first as part of the human function to produce very admirable effects and results in your reality. Although that shame became toxic and therefore poisonous and devastating indeed, even painful for most of you, we would suggest its original force and its original purpose were intended to be productive. You see, since shame is a real emotion, however constricting and negative it may seem, it has its positive potential, and it is important to come to peace with the fact that your reality had to include shame as part of the growing process. Unfortunately, it became toxic and destructive. It was intended to be a positive influence. Right? Shame is supposed to produce the phenomenon of remorse. It is supposed to establish the initial foundation of remorse in infancy. It is supposed to practice its implementation during childhood and adolescence, and is supposed to make its application, the remorse application of remorse, in the adult years. You see, is a feeling of genuine sorrow when you have made a mistake, when you have done something wrong, when you have hurt someone or something, including yourself. A genuine feeling of sorrow, of being sorry, right? Now you can say the words and everybody learns them far too early in life. I am sorry for, I feel such sorrow, I feel remorse. The words are part of your vocabulary, but most people don't feel remorse even when they use the word. So often because you do not have the foundation or the implementations and the application as part of your own experience of humanness. I'm really feeling sorry. I feel sorry for myself. Or I feel martyred, or I feel guilty, or I feel defensive, or I feel righteous, or I feel ugly, awful. I feel self-punishing, but I don't really mean I feel sorrow. Often when you do something for which you should or would otherwise feel sorry or sorrowful, you instead feel very sorry for yourself, very martyred, very guilty, very defensive, very self-punishing, very sabotaging, and are self-destructive. And that, dear one, is not sorrow or remorse, right? Also, it is important to deal with healing shame not when you were an infant or a child, not as an adolescent, right? But now as an adult, to come to peace with this. The adolescent may not come to peace with adult shame, and therefore it may not be valuable at all to sit down, right, with your adolescent and talk about how shame is supposed to be a positive thing in their life, right? They are going to think you don't understand, that you are the enemy, that you are just like everybody else. And so don't try to convince them of the value or the place that shame did, or the role shame was supposed to play. Right? The infant in you can't begin to understand, nor can the child. So don't try to make them understand. Adult shame, right? But you are neither of these. You are not the infant or the child or the adolescent. You are now what? You are the grown-up. And therefore it's important to replace the leverage, in a sense, that retrospect might have given you, to replace that leverage with the peace of knowing that shame, as devastating as it has been for you, was intended to be a positive force and a positive influence that could have, if dealt with in the appropriate usages, work to your advantage. That's the first step in healing this final wave of adult shame, is coming to peace with the necessity of shame as a human function, that your reality had to include shame as part of the growing process. The second thing to do to heal adult shame, it is so vitally important to come to peace with the fact that adult shame is a part of your reality. That you come to peace with the presence, not the content of, but the presence of adult shame in you. I was ashamed as a child. That happened then, don't you see? Okay, you finally admit it. But you don't want to admit shame is going on now as an adult. Now, in each of the waves of shame that we have talked of, and sometimes even joked about, people say, oh, infancy shame, that has nothing to do with me. Nothing happened to me in my infancy. Well, then again, maybe something did, but certainly not my childhood. I was well to my adolescent years to only discover, to listening and working, that, my God, I do have shame, more than I know. Oh my, yes, I do have shame. During each of those periods, and in fact, it even accumulated for some of you from one wave to another. I see this all the time with others who say to me, I do not have shame, when in fact, they have shame. They just deny it, refuse to accept it, say they outgrew it, I got over it, it was nothing, doesn't impact me now, don't worry about it. Now, in retrospect, outside the set, past those experiences, you can look back and say, well, yes, okay, I can see I was abandoned, rejected, denied, etc. on such a day and such an intensity, right? That, or I was truly abused, if not sexually, then abused physically or emotionally in such a way that, or I can look now at the adult child, the alcoholic parent, the abusive parent, or a broken home, that truly I was taught I was defective, not good enough, bad, wrong, and that I was flawed. That happened then, don't you see? Okay, you finally admit it, but I don't want to admit it's going on now, okay? I don't want to say I'm doing it here. No, it happened, and it's almost as though you want to say that abandonment then produced shame, but abandonment now doesn't. Why not? Why is it that if you were abandoned as a child or an adolescent, it produced shame, but as an adult, when you're abandoned, it doesn't? Oh, admittedly not. Any or all abandonment will produce shame. It doesn't then either. But there are certain levels of abandonment that you feel right here, right now in your adult life that are just as shame producing as if you were 5 or 15. You can be abused. Oh, all right, someone's 4 times taller than you and throwing you around down the stairs and punching you in the stomach or breaking your ribs. But there's a lot of abuse that goes on from one adult person to another. Better wives, better husbands, date rape. These are our sources of shame. No, it only happened when I was 10. An adult woman who is raped feels as much shame, maybe more, as a man who is abused physically or sexually, even though you are a man. Many men at that are just as abusive and just as shame producing. So the emotional abuse that adults do to adults, wife to husbands and husbands to wife, can shred your esteem and can shred your identity and can shred your sense of self, maybe more devastating than when you were a child. You see, there is this assumption, no, it's something that happened in the past. It can't be happening now, right? But you can be taught, you can be abandoned, you can be abused, and you can be wronged now, and that produces shame now. If you were in the past, more likely than not, you are now, but even if you weren't, then you can be now. There is adult shame. It doesn't mean you haven't uncovered something as an infant, yet it may be happening right now in your world and interactions and your relationships. Maybe you're in an abusive relationship, a codependent relationship, or a narcissistic relationship now, where you are taught and abused in such a way, you are wronged in such a way. It's important to not just assume that so many sadly will make that if you feel shame now, it had to come from then, and that the resolution is then. If you're being abandoned and abused in your current relationship, being battered is somehow happening because when you were a child and or when you were an adolescent. Maybe, but it's also now too, right? This is what is so often forgotten. The battered wife who seeks help often searches for childhood, her adolescence, or, searches a relationship with her mother and father, which certainly can prove to be an indication of serving as a sign. She's also being battered now, and now is producing shame. Okay? So for those of you who have been abandoned and hurt now, it's adult shame. And although it may be embarrassing, and it may make you seem weak, nonetheless, it is important to come to peace with the presence of adult shame. Even if it happened then, and you can't find its evidence now, it's still present, right? It's important as a second step to come to peace with the presence of your adult shame, as well as admit whether it's true in your infancy, childhood, or adolescence, to come to peace with your adult shame. Thirdly, you fully understand the devastating impact of what went wrong with shame in these adult years, with its deep pain, and to recognize the damage shame is doing to you now. That you have not just shame in your infancy that you can barely remember, in the verbal stages, not just contracts from your childhood at the first break, 6 to 8 to 10 or to 12 years old, and not just residues of the adolescent years, although those things may be there. You have adult shame that needs your attention now, that needs to be ended now, that needs to be healed now, or otherwise, through the teaching, through the abandoning you do, through the abuse that you do, or the wrong that you do, you will pass it on and infect others. So as you can come to peace with the necessity of shame as a human condition, and as you can come to peace with the presence of shame in your own self. Another thing that is important to end shame conclusively is to recognize, right, the damage shame is doing to you. Not that it is doing philosophically, not that it is doing academically, but that it is doing to you now. Now we have always said over the years that the effects of shame are extensively the shame whenever it occurs. That shame, first of all, robs you of your human gifts, the powers, the abilities, right? The knowledge, the attributes that make you unique. Your capacity to perceive and conceive, to think and to feel, to know your specific thoughts, wants, and needs, to be able to place them, right, personally for others in your world and in the inner world. Imagination to conclusively love yourself and another, to love a world and to love the inner world, to consciously heal yourself, divine ones. In other kingdoms, plants and animals can heal, can love, but none can do it conclusively, to perceive and conceive, to think, to feel, to know your wants consciously, and to place them or to differ them consciously, to imagine, to use that imagination. These are human, and what distinguishes you from other kingdoms. Not only are they your gifts, they are your spiritual powers, and the shame robs you of them. You see, as an adult, these gifts are most important of all. To perceive and conceive, to think and feel and know your wants are important to a child and important to an adolescent, but nonetheless are as important as they are to the adult version of yourself. So you need more than ever in your world, particularly now in this tremendous decade of all decades, to perceive, to create, to imagine, to think, to feel, have those wants, to be able to place them or differ from them, to heal and to love is so critical as a grown-up. And when you are robbed of them, the loss is most evident as a grown-up. These are a source of power, your secret pathway to unlimited power. The ability to act, to create, to manifest originates in those gifts. And if shame has robbed you of them, you have crippled your own power as an adult that is more profound than ever before in any other level. Therefore, when you are robbed of these things, whether in infancy, childhood, or adolescence, it is devastating. It is sad. It is very unfortunate. But what happens to you now as a grown-up, as an adult, can be even more devastating. Fourthly, and finally, of course, you don't have technique, you don't know how to deal with the shame that is currently influencing the present in the future, rather than one that is influencing from the past into the present. You're not sure how to deal with the shame in a current perspective that is not in retrospect, or to deal with the shame while in the midst of its set, or to deal with the shame as you are already an offender of that very shame. And therefore it's complicated with a lack of technique, a lack of method of finally healing it. Okay? Therefore, you're going to find a lot of people out there who will deal with their infant shame and deal with their child's shame and their adolescent shame, and then be at a loss of what to do next, and find the ultimate shame, the greatest. You are in that as much as they have done, it is still there, and that they are passing it on. Maybe not as potently as they would have otherwise, but passing it on nonetheless to the next generation or peers. Therefore, it is important for you to acknowledge that, all right, it is here, even though it's not supposed to be, and that I need to let myself feel and think with intensity, even though my will doesn't want me to admit that I don't fully know how to receive, and even though I am supposed to, and revalue my own spirituality and my own spiritual experience, to find the resolution, to value uniqueness, not just as a phrase, not just as something you print on a blackboard, but something you live to reach beyond. The sound bite of information bite. Yes, use it. Don't scorn it. Don't turn your back on it, but dig deeper with your own processes and your own self, especially to learn the technique. As you can come to peace with the necessity of shame, come to peace with the presence, not the content, but the presence of your own adult shame. As you can own for yourself the uniqueness of its devastation, what went wrong, and why it's not going away, then you're prepared and ready to take the final step to learn, and more than learn, you apply the technique to really end now, finally, completely, and exclusively to end the shame, to heal it, and to be done with it. If you would like to heal your adult shame, then in a private healing session with me, you will learn the specific techniques geared precisely toward this kind of shame, to end the shame completely and conclusively. And if you're ready and willing to heal your adult shame, then please contact me. Thank you for listening to me today. This is Chris Parr, Syrian and Lemurian Wisdoms and Teachings.